Hey everybody, I'm Rob Cairns. I'm the CEO, founder, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas of Stunning Digital Marketing. Hope everybody's doing well today. In today's podcast, we sit down with a podcast expert, Mr. Todd Miller, good friend of mine. And Todd and I have this amazing conversation about podcasting. So please grab your favorite drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy this podcast. Good day, everybody. Rob Cairns here. I'm here with my friend Todd Miller, and Todd is a podcast expert. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about his passion today. How are you today, Todd?
Doing great. Thank you for the invitation to chat.
Oh, my pleasure. We've known each other a little while, and we haven't chatted in a long time. So I thought it was overdue. So give me some of your background. How did you get into podcasting? What did you do before? And talk a little bit about that.
I think my passion for microphones started when I was about 8. I had a little wireless microphone that ran on, I believe it was FM, and I would play 45 records and put the microphone down. And when they finished, I would announce them, and my friend would be downstairs or out in the backyard listening on a little radio. It was fun. Little did I know that that would turn into my passion so many years later. From that, I actually decided to get some formal education. So I went into audio engineering and spent many long nights in recording studios, not getting enough sleep, but having the time of my life.
That's really cool, actually.
Yeah, it gave me a good, solid foundation in building quality audio. And that's one of the things I've found over the years is that it really influences how long someone will listen to your podcast by the sound of it, the quality of it, whether you've invested in good equipment and learned how to use it properly. So once I got the formal education, I moved into, recording and music. And then around 2004, I started my own internet radio station. And we were doing what was then known as on-demand audio. The term podcast really didn't enter the lexicon until about 2007 and 2008. That's when people started referring to them as podcasts. Mm-hmm. So we were doing on-demand audio in 2004, and it just stuck.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I know there's some big players in the business now, like the guys like the Wonderlies, a guy like Leo Laporte in the U.S. I'm sure you're quite familiar with him and his podcast network. And there's some big players, some like national broadcasting has gone into it and stuff like that. And then you're in that mix. What's your typical clientele for podcasting? Is it small business, large business, big clients? What is it these days?
I think it's a mix. I think by and large, most of my clients are on the smaller side. So they're entrepreneurs or small enormous business. It's been coined. So they're smaller businesses that are really looking at equaling the playing field with the big, multinationals that have endless, marketing budgets. And that's really something that levels the playing field, is that, anyone can start up a podcast and attract a following. Generally, most small businesses have a following, whether it's a client base or rabid fans for their work. And this is just another way of sharing and connecting with your fan base authentically in your own voice. And I think that's really the attractive part about it, is they are hearing somebody from the company or from the business in their own voice talking about issues that matter to them.
Yeah. It's funny, when I started podcasting, I started about a year and a half ago, and I sort of said, do I want to do this? Oh, I'll do one. I'll do two. I might get to 20. And I don't know if you noticed, recently I surpassed the 100 mark, and I said, and I've been doing this for a year and a half. And it got to the point where I was actually fed up with blogging. I'd written probably 3,000 blog posts in 10 years of being in business for myself. And I said, I don't like this anymore. And I said, I'm an avid podcast listener. So my wife sort of said at the start of COVID, what's Rob going to do with no sports? He's going to listen to podcasts. There's truth to that. And then I liked the medium so much, I just started doing it. And, I think that's the key for somebody new, is just to start, right?
I think you just start. I think you need a roadmap to figure out where you want to go with it.
Yep.
And I always counsel my clients to consider this a long-term marketing strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some people approach me that say, well, I want to do one podcast or two podcasts and I'm done. And while those can be exciting, informative, engaging pieces of content, to me, they invite further listens because you're exciting people, you're getting them hooked,
yep.
And then you disappear. So, there's, people like Joe Rogan, he's been doing his for years, Tim Ferriss. There have been people that are long-term podcasters that don't view it as marketing so much as they view it as education or a way to interact with their fans. And so you get to hear the voice of the person, unlike a blog. Now that is written in your voice. I agree. And it is somewhat personal. When they hear Rob on the podcast, they know it's Rob, and they hear Rob and they hear your passion. They hear your smile. They hear your disappointment or your frustration or your anger about a certain topic. Yeah. And I think really what crosses that threshold is it becomes an intimate vehicle to share points of view with others.
It's so true. I mean, one of the avid podcasts, you mentioned Joe Rogan and you mentioned Tim Ferriss, both on my podcast list, by the way, is Gary V. And we all know Gary Vaynerchuk, the wine guy. And Gary's excitable. And believe me, you can hear the passion in Gary when he does a podcast and talk. And it's really interesting to listen to say the least.
He is. And he's an interesting guy, too, because he started doing a podcast many years ago, and then he got away from it.
Yeah.
And I think within the last year or so, he's gotten back into it, and he's reignited that passion. He's really found that he missed it, and it's a great way of sharing.
Yeah. I should tell you while we're talking, my favorite all-time podcast right now is one by a company called Wonderly, who I'm sure you're aware of, called Business Wars. I don't know if you've heard that one, but they talk about, they pit two companies against each other, and they'll talk like in 6 or 7 episodes, the battle between the companies. And I just find that so interesting. And it's not really in the marketing space per se. It's more an all-around business, but that's kind of like my favorite right now out there. Do you have a favorite, Todd? That's not yours?
I actually don't listen to a lot of mine, and that's funny because I don't personally have a podcast right now. I'm so busy producing for others, and that's a mistake I need to rectify as well.
It's a shoemaker not fixing his own shoes problem again, right?
You see him with holes in his shoes. You go, do I really want to take my shoes to this guy? But there's so many things I want to talk about, and time is so precious. So as an aside, I'm going to get back to it. My favorite would probably be, I like Joe Rogan's, although it can get a little, it can stray a bit. Yeah. One of the things that I find personally frustrating as a podcast producer is a host that doesn't have a clear concept of time. Now, Joe Rogan doesn't need a clock because it's Joe Rogan talking with, Elon Musk or Bill Clinton or whoever. And, if you really like what he does, you listen for the 2.5 hours or the 3 hours, hour and a half that he talks.
Yeah.
But if you're an unknown entity, I prefer to keep it to a short, concise podcast until you build a following. And then you go, you know what? We've been talking for the last year for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. And I've heard that you want more. You want longer conversations, or you want more information. Mm-hmm. We're going to go to an hour. So while I really enjoy what Joe does, and it's a wonderful podcast, again, it's just that time commitment for me is difficult to follow regularly.
Yeah. Yeah. I have that. One of my favorite podcasts is Leo Laporte's national radio show called The Tech Guy. I listen to religiously, but the problem is it's basically a rebroadcast of his national radio show, which is 3 hours on Saturdays and Sundays. Mm-hmm. And then he gives you all the back chatter that's going on, not on the radio. So the podcast typically runs, oh, 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and a half. And it's like, where do you find time to listen to 2.5 hour podcasts sometimes? It's pushing it, if you know what I mean.
Unless, the wonderful thing about podcasts, it's really one of the only things only types of media you can consume while doing something else. I mean, you can washing dishes, driving on the subway. That is the brilliant part of it. You download it. If you subscribe and you get that RSS notification, it shows up on your phone or your device. And then you can chip away at it all week as you're driving. So maybe your commute's a half an hour a day. At the end of the week, you've consumed the podcast, just in the car or on the subway, because you don't need Wi-Fi. It's on your phone, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But yeah, it is a big time commitment for some podcasts that are being produced.
Yeah. What is your favorite podcast catcher of choice? Do you have one?
Well, I'm primarily an Apple guy, so I just use Apple Podcasts. However, a lot of my clients are, Samsung people, or they're in the Google world, so they're using Google Play, or they're using other apps to catch all their podcasts. Yeah. But I just use the native Apple Podcast app, and that seems to work for me.
Yeah. There was a really interesting study that came out recently that I read, and iTunes podcasts are like the number one consumed, and partially because in the Android world, everything is split over multiple apps and multiple, and actually Spotify was number two. And I know for myself, I'm generally a Pocket Cast guy. I have been for a long time. One of the things I like with Pocket Cast is it actually will let you, if you pay for it, sync with your PC. So when I'm at home, I don't listen off my phone. I listen right off my laptop, and that makes life easier.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, I routinely check stats of podcasts I produce, and the number one metric is Apple Podcasts. And then you're right, Spotify is usually number two, and then we get into Google Play or Spreaker, Stitcher. You get into those. I wouldn't call them B-level, but I would call them alternative podcast catchers. And surprisingly, iTunes has been showing up as its own entity. So there's still a good base of iTunes listeners that listen on their PC or their Mac, and they're using iTunes to subscribe. And now Apple has killed iTunes. I don't know exactly when it died, but so you got diehards like me that are still searching and bookmarking and subscribing to podcasts via the iTunes software.
Yeah. The only podcast I'm actually listening to on Spotify, because it's a Spotify exclusive, is Michelle Obama's new podcast. She signed an exclusive deal with Spotify, so that one I just pick up on Spotify.
They kind of surprised me when they moved to podcasts, but it was a natural pickup for them, serving multiple audiences, and they make it so ridiculously easy to get your podcast listed that it's just, I tell people, why not, Yeah.
During COVID-19, you've had to pivot a little bit. You had a studio in the West End, you have a studio downtown, you do some work from home. How did you pivot your business, and how did you handle that?
As everyone else, mid-March, we started hearing things, and I was told the kids weren't going back to school. So immediately I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to figure out a studio situation at home where I can have a bit of privacy, which I've done. But most of the in-person jobs that I had lined up either put a hold on things, because at the beginning, again, we were told, oh, well, we're going to shut down for 2 weeks and, maybe 4 weeks, and then we'll be back to normal. So everybody just sort of took a pause and said, we can wait a month. We'll wait a month or 2 weeks and see what happens. Others kept going, and we just switched to virtual. And I got a surprising boost, or a surprising bump from new customers that said, you know what, this is a great time for me to start doing a podcast. I don't have work to go to, or I'm switching all of my clients to virtual, so I'm home and I have some extra time now. So why don't we do that podcast we've been talking about? So generally, like everybody else, we switched to Zoom or, an online recording app to work. And initially, as you've no doubt are aware, there was this huge migration to Zoom, and then everything started crapping out, and Oh, Phil's frozen again, and Phil, you're
Oh yeah.
there was a lot of that frustration of trying to get everybody who was non-technical to be somewhat technical, because I couldn't. One of the things I do is when I'm setting someone up and they're going to do a remote podcast, I generally visit their home studio and demonstrate how to use Zoom, and here's the mute button, and here's
Yeah.
how you change your audio preferences, and blah, blah, blah. I couldn't do that. So we were doing a screen share saying, okay, you see that button? No, not that one. The other one. Yeah, 3 buttons over. Click that one, and then you're going to choose this option. And you had to kind of walk everybody through. So it was a somewhat challenging time to get everyone up to speed on technical aspects of doing a podcast remotely.
So true. I mean, I've done Zoom calls where they've run great and they've killed out, and I get that challenge. Aside from podcasting, one of the things I'm involved in right now is helping the Peel School Board with the remote learning side of things, and it's the same issue. It's like you jump on a call, you kind of show some buttons, and then you say try it, and it's not as easy as doing it in person. There's no question.
No, and challenges like people not having the right headset or microphone, or
Yep.
they thought they were using their USB mic, but it was in fact their built-in laptop mic, and cats and dogs barking and meowing in the background. It was just, and I just got to the point where it's like, everyone knows we're home. We're not in multi-million-dollar recording studios. So we just have to expect that there are going to be babies crying and cats meowing and dogs barking at the postman. And, I think we just got to the point where it was real. It really crossed a threshold into, this is where we are. And I happen to be doing a podcast from home. I mean, I do a TV show as well, and we're taping from home right now. And I'm watching my screen, and I could see my son coming into the screen, and he was coming up behind me. He wanted to ask me a question about something, and it was just real life. It's just where we are right now.
So true. I've got, I don't know if you know, I've got 3 dogs. One of them is sleeping behind me right now, and he's really quiet. And I did a recording a couple of weeks ago with a couple of friends of mine, and between us, we had 7 dogs, and somehow we got through a 45-minute podcast without a dog peep. And then there's other times, and I actually don't edit the dogs out. I just leave them there because people like realism to a point. So.
I'm mixed. I mean, I'll let the host ultimately decide what they want left in. If I find it from a technical standpoint too distracting, I'll try and remove it. But if it becomes part of the conversation, and we've had podcasts where dogs have, done all sorts of stuff and they laugh about it, and then where were we? Oh, and let's continue. And it becomes part of the charm of the show, I guess.
Yeah. Let's talk equipment, because to do a podcast, you got to have a few basics. For a beginner, where do you suggest they start, and what should they get right off the top?
So first of all, I guess it comes down to budget. I find that people have some money or they have no money, and they want to start. So if they have no money, I say, well, everyone basically has a podcast studio in their pocket, which is a phone.
Yep.
And it can start with something like a little an iRig mic that plugs into any smartphone and will up your quality rather than talking right into the phone. It just has a more warm, focused sound than speaking into your phone. If you can't even do that, again, just use your phone, monitor via headphones, and that's the way to start. And as you said earlier, just start, get something happening, and then develop your wish list. Where do you want to be in 3 months or 6 months, and then start planning gear. If you have some money, a couple of $100, I recommend a good USB microphone, something like a Blue Yeti. I mean, that seems to be the go-to standard now for everyone. You're seeing them pop up on screens everywhere. Everyone's using those. There are other options as well, some more expensive, some less expensive. That is fine if you're just doing a one-on-one Zoom call. If you're getting to the point where you're wanting to get people in on phones, or you have multiple guests that are live in your studio, then you're looking at something like a mixer, where you're looking at getting a USB mixer where you can plug all your microphones and your computer into, and then everything gets recorded either in the mixer if it has a recording function, or you're looking at something like like a recording program like Cubase or Pro Tools or something like that, where you can record everything and edit it later.
Yeah. What's a typical mixer work these days? And do you have a recommendation on one for somebody who wants one?
I find personally, from personal experience, I started with Behringer products. Good price point. So you can start with like a 4-channel, so you can plug 4 microphones in, and then you've got line channels, so you can set up a mix minus, or you can get a Skype call in there, and set headphone feeds for everybody, which is kind of nice. My personal Swiss Army knife right now is the Zoom L12. It's got 8 mic ins, and it has a bunch of line ins, so you can have up to 8 microphones and still plug in, your computers and things. It can serve as an interface, so you can plug it in and let your computer handle the recording or use it for Zoom. It can also record, so you can take it out on location and record everything wherever you are. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful tool.
Yeah. Besides hardware, there's always the editing that has to be done. Do you have any recommendation on some editing tools for podcasting?
I think one of the best editing tools that's free is Audacity. I mean, it's for Mac and PC. It's a wonderful tool to get started on editing. We Mac users have a wonderful tool built in called GarageBand. And I mean, I started using GarageBand in 2003 or 2002, recording music, and it became my go-to podcasting app to start with. It's free, works well, easy to edit, comes out sounding great. Audacity's big brother would be Adobe Audition, and that's the one where I flex my muscles. It's a very powerful, great sounding editing app that does a lot of very cool things. One, being noise reduction. You've got some background noise or a fan, or right now one of my neighbors happens to be cutting his grass. So there's always a challenge in the editing phase to make it sound as pristine as possible. You don't want it sounding anesthetic. You don't want it sounding clinical, but you do want it sounding clear, so there's very few distractions. Dogs barking would be one example.
Yeah. The distractions we don't need. And Audition's been around for a long time. I mean, I think Adobe gets a bad rap in the business sometimes because their products are expensive, but they're really pro tools. So, I mean, that's kind of the key. Is Audition part of the Creative Cloud Suite? I cannot remember, to be honest.
Yeah, there's so many things in there that I personally use. The encoding engine, the Premiere Pro now. So I'm doing a lot more video work. And I was using iMovie to start with. And I think iMovie is a wonderful way to start for people. But then you start wanting more professional transitions or fades, or, you want to use some other tools, then you're going to migrate to, a Premiere Pro or, something like that. Or what's the other one?
DaVinci Resolve?
No, I haven't used that one. Final Cut Pro is the
Final, which is the Mac only product. Yep.
I believe it is, yeah.
I've latched on to, I started using for video DaVinci Resolve, which is by Blackmagic, and they're really smart. What they do is they give away the basic version, which does like 70%, and then they charge, I think the pro version is $299 US or something like that. And I find for doing fades and stuff, DaVinci's kind of become my go-to product for a long time. So partially because a videocaster up at Sportsnet recommended it in a talk I saw a year and a half ago, and I was looking at switching products, and I just kind of fell in love with it. So.
It's always nice when you get somebody that's been using it that just raves about it, because for a long time, and I don't know if you're the same, I get comfortable in my methods and my process.
Oh yeah.
I know when I'm doing an audio podcast, I'm going to edit in Adobe Audition. If I'm doing video, I'm going to be in Premiere Pro. But I didn't always start there. Everything was in GarageBand or was in iMovie. And then I thought, okay, you know what? This is great. And it really makes it easy for me, but ultimately does it serve the client? So if I'm putting a lower third in there, a title, Does it look as professional as what I'm seeing other people produce? No. Okay. So we got to put our learning hat on, and we need to go and stretch and use our neuroplasticity to go and learn a new product.
Yes. Yes.
But again, you can do things the same way, and it makes it easier for you. But again, you have to serve your client and think, is it in their best interest? And does it deliver the quality on par with what everyone else is doing? And if not, my personal philosophy is I need to stretch and learn and be uncomfortable for a period of time, but learn a new skill.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The biggest thing about doing any production, any marketing, any of the stuff we do is that learning curve. And I think it's one reason why I like the business so much is, I'm always learning, and I get bored, Todd, very easily. Like I'm so ADHD, it's not funny. And when I get bored, it's ridiculous. So I'll just go learn something.
Well, that's going to serve you in the long run, A, because you're going to have a lot more skills that you can call upon, and B, because your brain is constantly stretching and learning and growing. So, it's going to serve you much later down the pike when you're, again, your brain is just much more pliable and ready to receive information.
That's so true. So we've talked about that. Now, when you're podcasting, do you have any tips for people getting guests on their podcast? Do you have any good tips on that one?
For me, it always starts with planning out a series of topics or themes. So I always counsel my clients to brainstorm as many, like whiteboard, as many topics in advance that they'd like to talk about. And then it's a question of, okay, is this something I'm going to talk about myself, or would I like to bounce this off a guest? If so, do I have anyone in my network that can speak to it? If not, so we're going to talk about mindset. Who do I want? Well, are we talking maybe a Guy Kawasaki, or are we talking chicken soup for the soul guy? I mean, it really allows you to think about who you want. And I'm finding generally that the big fish, the Guy Kawasaki's, the, Joe Rogan's, and, people like that are actually guesting on other podcasts because they realize it still serves them in the long run.
Yeah.
I've interviewed Jack Canfield a few years ago, and I really thought there would be a no when we asked him, and he said, fine, great, let's do it. And I was like, wow, that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it is, sometimes it's the ask in your network. I wanted to do, as of the airing of this, the one that will come out right before it is on live streaming. So I wanted to do a live streaming and a podcasting one back to back. And I reached out to you and said, I know you're an expert. I know you're in my network. I know you're a friend. Can we have a chat? And you graciously said yes. Sometimes it's just the ask.
It really is. And I realize that I am here to provide a service to people, but I'm also here to provide education to others and help other people get started down this path to podcasting. I love to meet with people, and whether they choose to use me or they want to go and do it on their own, great, but I don't mind making that short investment to help them decide whether it's something they want to do, and whether they want to move forward on their own or with me. And then we start talking about some of the mechanics of the podcast, and one of them is guests, and fine tuning that ask, because they won't do it all the time, but they will if it intrigues them and speaks to their passions and their interests.
Mm-hmm. And the other big thing with podcasting, and I tell anybody out there who's starting a podcast, is consistency, right? It really matters that if you choose to put your podcast out on a Wednesday every week, that you need to put that podcast out Wednesday of every week, because that builds listeners, and that's really key.
And you don't want it to become a chore. You don't want it to get to the point where it's like, oh, it's Tuesday, I've got to do a podcast for tomorrow. So I always tell people, what's the minimum length of time or the maximum length of time in between episodes that you would feel comfortable with? So, can you do one every 2 weeks or every month? Not great for engagement, like a monthly podcast, unless it's like a mega super podcast where it's like, here's what happened during the month in real estate or in whatever the topic might be, then it's relatable and makes sense. But you don't really want to commit to a weekly one if you can't do it, because then you start with 3 or 4 episodes and life intervenes, or you get bored and then you disappear. And then next month you do an episode and you notice your listens are down because you kind of disappear off people's radar.
Yeah. I think the key is to do things like record ahead of time. For me, what works really well is batch editing. So when I edit one, I'll edit 2 or 3 in the same day and be ahead of myself. I think that for me is the biggest thing.
Batch editing and batch recording. I like to ask people, are the topics going to be evergreen, where you're talking about mindset, or you're talking about investing? I used to do a real estate show where we were talking about weekly rates, and we were talking about real estate in the news that week. So it had to be a weekly podcast. So we couldn't necessarily batch record, but I said, can we do some that are evergreen? Let's talk to a stager. Let's talk to a home renovator. Let's talk to a handy person, and record those, so that if there's a week where you're really busy or you just don't feel like doing it, we've got episodes in the can and we drop them in, so that your consistency is still there.
Yeah. And people, life gets in the way. People have business emergencies, they have vacations, they have family, they have COVID problems in this day. I hate to laugh, but it's hard, and you just gotta plan it out. Any other last tips for anybody who wants to do a podcast? Like if you had 4 or 5 real good tips, do you have them?
I guess the first would be really be crystal clear on why you're doing the podcast. Is it for marketing purposes? Is it for education? Is it for entertainment? Why are you doing it, and who is it for? If you don't have those 2 things crystal clear in your mind, I find that the podcasts just become kind of aimless. You're doing them, but you're not sure who they're for or why you're even doing them. And there's nothing wrong with doing a strictly marketing podcast. You're doing this to increase the viability and visibility of your business. Cool. Awesome. But just be clear with that. If it's educational, make sure it's coming from an educational standpoint, so that you're not confusing people by dropping in marketing messages every 2 minutes. And it's like, wait a second, I wanted to learn how to cook, and now the person's telling me I need to work with them to learn how to cook. That's kind of confusing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, as a marketer, I think the best podcasts are to give the information, because we all know information is free. You can jump on this magical site called Google, right, and find anything you want. And, from a marketing perspective, people like to choose who they work with and what the solutions are. So I think in a podcast, you're 10 times better off giving out the information and just helping people. I really do. For me, that works the best, actually.
I like Gary's book, Jab, Jab, Hook, or whatever it was called, or
Yep.
Right. It was really about, give a ton of information away before you ask for something in return. It's okay to ask for something, but don't ask all the time or ask as the first thing. Set up that relationship where they can trust you. They know you're a trusted resource. You're delivering great content. And then, by the way, when Gary says, hey, I've got a new book, would you mind buying it? You're more likely to do that than if Gary opened the podcast, got a new book this week, would you buy it? It's the cart before the horse. You really, you haven't established that relationship where you're providing that wonderful information every week free of charge.
And build that relationship, because honestly, building relationships is 10 times better than dealing with somebody who doesn't know you or has no clue what you do or is not sure. And
you're likely to get more authentic reviews and authentic shares where somebody says, you got to hear this podcast. This guy's so great. The tips that he or she delivers every week just blow my mind, and they're so useful. I can apply them every week. And they tend to refer that to a friend. You got to listen to this. The same way we do with what's on Netflix this week.
Or what's in the news this week, or what's on Facebook, or
right. So another would be going back to consistency. I have a problem, and I'll be honest, with people that podcast but then disappear during summer or during the Christmas break.
Yep.
Again, that's why I preach those batch recordings, so where you can record some episodes that aren't specific to a calendar event or time of year, but still provide new fresh content every week for your listeners. Because yeah, they're on vacation as well during the summer, but they're going to listen to you at the cottage or on the trip up to the cottage or whatever. And if you just disappear, as you're a marketer, you'll know it's almost like you're back to square one.
So true. I was away 2 weeks ago up in the middle of nowhere, and I had 2 podcasts drop on their usual days. And I had even email marketing go out, and somebody said, somebody emailed me who knew I was away and said, "Aren't you away?" I said, "Yeah. Haven't you heard of the tool called scheduling ahead of time?" you know, so
I think consistency is key. One of the other tips I like to provide to people is figure out what your the mechanics of your show are. How long, how often. Okay, so great. We're going to do a 15-minute podcast every week. How is that 15 minutes structured?
Yep.
I want to see them have a template. So we've got a 30-second open where we introduce our guests. We've got our theme music or whatever. Bang, we're into the content. How long is the content? Is it the full? If we're doing 15 minutes, we got to do a 1-minute close. So we're down to like 13. Okay, is that 13 going to be one segment? Is it going to be two? Number of guests? Structure that so that it becomes repeatable. And it really allows you to take some of the technical aspects and put those into auto drive. You've got autopilot and you're maintaining eye contact with the guest, or you're on Zoom and you're fully engaged. The only thing you need to worry about is the time. So you've got a little timer set up and you know that you're golden.
Yeah, so true. Thanks for your time today, Todd. Really appreciate it. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, talk about podcast services and all of that, what's the best way?
Best way is just to check out our site, podcastexperts.ca, and things that will help them produce a better podcast free of charge. And then you'll be on our mailing list when we drop announcements about new episodes or interesting things. One of the things we're going to be doing in the future is doing probably some in-person or remote. We'll see how things go with the pandemic, but do some learning events coming up in the future to help people get started.
Yeah. Can you repeat that site one more time, please?
It is podcastexperts.ca.
Thank you very much, Todd, and you have an awesome day.
You too, Rob. I appreciate it.
Thank you. A very special thank you to Todd Miller for joining me on this week's podcast. As always, if you need more information about us or digital marketing help, please go on over to our website at stunningdigitalmarketing.com. If you need to email me, I can be reached at vip@stunningdigitalmarketing.com, on the phone 416-624-7647, or you can also tweet at me at Rob Cairns. I am on all other social media platforms. Go on over to our website, scroll down the bottom, and you'll find links to all those locations. And while you're doing that, down towards the bottom, sign up for a free digital marketing newsletter. I promise you, I will send you marketing tips and tricks. Very few sales emails. Sometimes there's a couple. And I just want to help your marketing efforts succeed. So check that out. As always, this podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and make your business succeed. Bye, everyone.